Hi, everyone. This is Aaron Larson, Executive Editor of Power Magazine, and you're listening to the Power Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Sally Jacquemin. Sally is the Vice President and General Manager of Power and Utilities with AspenTech. So thank you so much for joining me, Sally, and please tell a little bit about yourself and AspenTech.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm excited to be here today. As Aaron mentioned, I lead our power and utilities business here at AspenTech. AspenTech is a global software leader helping asset-intensive industries really meet the increasing demand for resources given the rapidly growing population in a profitable and sustainable manner. Our software solutions address complex environments and industrial processes where it's critical to optimize the asset design, operation, and maintenance lifecycle. Our digital grid management product suite at AspenTech, here we are responsible for providing open, high performance automation solutions that are seen in control rooms across power generation, transmission, distribution, microgrid, and oil and gas industries.
One of the things that I wanted to talk with you about is how the load and power demand is growing around the country and around the world, really. What are some of the trends that you see driving that today?
Sure. Well, it's a rare day where you don't see some major news headline about the energy transition and all the different challenges and changes that are happening to our global electric system. You can see that from the move towards renewable adoption, decentralization, electrification with more electric vehicles and grid edge devices, even the aging infrastructure. A lot of utility grids are over 100 years old and need new technology. Put on top of all of that, climate, severe weather events, and cybersecurity threats growing. And even in the utility industry, more than 50% of utility workers are eligible for retirement in North America in the next few years. So there's a skilled resource shortage in the industry. When you put all of these factors together, it really starts to create a perfect storm, a challenge for utilities today. And that's really when we talk about the energy transition, we talk about all of these factors coming together and, driving the utilities to act now and act in big ways.
There are definitely many challenges facing utilities today, and you mentioned a number of them. Some can be addressed with technology. For example, I know AspenTech works with companies that aggregate resources into virtual power plants, and utilizing this type of solution, you help utilities manage the power grid in kind of a dynamic and intelligent way. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits that this sort of approach offers?
Sure. Well, you have to understand also that the traditional power grid was a one-way flow of electricity from power generation through transmission to distribution. And now with distributed energy resources, DERs on the grid, think solar rooftops, e-vehicles, microgrids at the grid edge, you're really creating a system with more bi-directional power flow. At the end of the day, the grid operators need to balance supply to demand to maintain a reliable, safe grid with the lights on. And this job of maintaining a reliable, balanced grid and balancing supply to demand is getting harder to harder. So utilities are trying to figure out, well, how do I balance supply to demand? And one of the big ways to do this is through flexibility, load flexibility. Okay. And so that means things like demand response programs that incentivize people to run their dishwasher at 10 p.m. at night. And it means industrial commercial programs that can be curtailed during times of the day where the utility doesn't have enough supply. So all sorts of not only technology innovations, but business models have emerged to drive towards this flexible system and the ability to balance load to supply, because that supply is no longer a firm fixed power plant. Now the supply is intermittent with renewables such as solar and wind. And so the demand side also needs to be more flexible and intermittent to match that intermittency. So what we're seeing is things like microgrids are popping up, and that's a great way to help balance the load and, generate extra supply when needed. We're also seeing virtual power plants, which you mentioned. A virtual power plant is essentially an aggregation of lots of different resources or assets from the grid, whether it be distributed energy resources or small nuclear reactors, modular nuclear reactors, or any electrical asset that can be grouped together, and as a whole they have a bigger impact on the grid than any individual asset would have on its own. And so you aggregate all these distributed energy resources and assets together to create a virtual power plant that can be dispatched to help balance the overall system supply to demand. And virtual power plants are becoming important not only for utilities, but in the private sector. Because of the commercial value of electricity rising and the market system rates, it's now profitable for these virtual power plants in many markets due to the value of power that they can supply during these periods of low supply.
Speaking of the markets, do you find these solutions to be more beneficial in certain locations than in others? For example, maybe in California, you have a different solution than you might have out in the Northeast or in Florida, for example. Does it differ from location to location?
It does differ, and that's primarily due to a few different factors. Is one, how much intermittent renewables they have on the grid. Is the grid 10% renewables, 50%, 100%? We have some customers today that when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing, over 100% of the power can be generated by renewables. The problem with that, though, is when a cloud comes over the sun or the wind stops blowing, that could go down to zero in an instant. So maintaining that balance is the key challenge utilities have right now. So the more renewables there are in a grid, the more unstable the grid is. And that is where a lot of this technology and innovation needs to be deployed. Those areas are also typically areas with high electric rates. And with the high electric rates, that makes the economics of things like a virtual power plant or an independent power producer very attractive, because producing power in a region that has a lack of firm power or lots of intermittent resources causing supply and demand issues, that power you generate as a virtual power plant or IPP is more valuable. And so the regions you mentioned with more renewables, with more congestion, more peak demand, those are the areas we're seeing first adopters of the technology, the new technology, and the new business models and economic models are starting to change.
Speaking of the technology, how difficult is it to integrate these new methods of doing things and the new resources and technology into a utility, for example, that's been doing business a certain way for decades?
You're hitting on a very important question here. So at AspenTech Digital Grid Management, our software is in control rooms of utilities around the world. And, think of these control rooms as, like an air traffic controller. There's people, sometimes dozens of people in front of computer displays, and they might have 6 or 7 displays in front of them. And there might be a giant video wall, think, a 60-foot, 100-foot video wall that's monitoring the grid in real time. These systems are deemed critical infrastructure. They're governed by government regulations such as NERC-CIP and FERC and so forth, because they need to be cyber secure. And these utilities cannot go down because then it becomes a public crisis. So any changes to this type of control technology at a utility is a big deal. And it's usually years in the making and a long-term approach to maintaining and managing the technology at these utilities. And some utilities have adopted and a digital strategy and are executing on that more than others. All utilities know they need to be investing in their digital solutions and modernizing their control room technology in order to meet the demands of the energy transition. So utilities need to be focusing more time and more money to ensure that their software and their systems are capable of enabling that utility of the future.
And I know you mentioned cybersecurity early on in the conversation. Is that something I'm sure you're very focused on, but are there certain best practices that companies are utilizing to be even more secure?
Absolutely. As a software vendor, we take all cybersecurity very seriously. And we abide and are certified by the ISO international standards like ISO 9001 and 27000. We also deliver each system as if the utility will need to certify it by their regulatory bodies. Those government regulations are rapidly becoming more stringent. We've seen a number of new regulations and requirements in places like Europe and in other regions of the world. And, utilities take a variety of measures to ensure these systems are secure. One of the key things we recommend is frequent upgrades, keeping the software up to date. Just like on your home computer, if you are still on Microsoft 2007, that's a security risk. Someone, that system's not being maintained, it's end of life, and it's probably has a number of security concerns. Utilities need to keep their software up to date. They need to abide by modern technology practices of upgrading every couple of years and keeping their systems fresh with the latest patches, cybersecurity enhancements, and new product features. So it's a constant endeavor and a maintenance issue that utilities, today, frankly, struggle to keep up with because it takes resources and people to maintain these systems and the environments, the different instances that they might have, the redundancies, the failovers. There's a variety of different architectures of these systems because it's not just software, it's truly a system of infrastructure, servers, firewalls, third party operating systems. It's a very complex ecosystem that utilities need to manage and that we actively partner with our customers to ensure compliance to not only utility standards, but also industry regulation.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say it's not just compliance. You've got to do more than just compliance. You've got to take it to the next step, and I think that's certainly true. You talked about different business models that are influencing the market as power demand spikes, and there's been different economic opportunities for new players like independent power producers and microgrid operators. What do you see as their challenges, and how are they different from utilities?
Sure. One great example of this is everyone has seen in the news recently a lot of dialogue around AI driving data center growth. What do data centers need? They need power generation. They're energy hawks. And that power generation is not just sitting around with utilities having excess capacity ready to sell to these data centers. So these data centers are looking around and they're saying, well, where can I buy this power from? And so it's creating a new market for independent power producers, virtual power plants, microgrids to produce and generate and find off takers, sell the power they produce. And so it's a dynamic that's changing around the world with the energy demand in different pockets. And some of these private companies, the IPPs and whatnot, they can move faster and they can build plants faster than a regulated utility. So it's really kind of a space race to capitalize on some of the demands in the power and utility industry right now.
You bring up a good point because I've even seen a lot of data center operators, such as the Metas of the world, the Googles of the world, getting into the power industry and considering building small modular reactors, for example. Do you think that's going to be a trend that continues going forward?
Yes, I'm excited to hear some of that because a few years ago, the outlook on small modular reactors was not very attractive, quite dismal. And now, just in the past 12 months, with the focus on AI and data centers, the economics and the will and the need to invest in technology like SMRs is on the forefront of the conversation. So, it's amazing how, kind of a more stagnant traditional industry has been catapulted to the front of, a number of industries as a front runner in new investment and new business models and new players in the industry. Like to compare our industry to the telecom industry in the 80s, where we all remember we had a single service provider that we paid our phone bill to once a month. If you think back then to now no one has a landline anymore. Everyone has their choice of multiple vendors in for cellular phones. The cellular phone technology is beyond changed from 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the infrastructure, the communication infrastructure has changed. And not only do we not have, landlines anymore, but now we have things like Starlink satellites that are used for communication. That same type of transformation is happening today in the power and utility industry. And we're just on the beginning stages of this wave.
Do you think that will play into the workforce issues? Are people, young people that are in college today, do you think they're going to start seeing the power industry as a tech industry that they want to be involved in?
I hope so. We need smart, talented folks to come into our industry. University programs for power system engineers, electrical engineers, trade schools for electricians. I mean, the electric industry needs qualified individuals. And it is an exciting area. We have engineers and developers doing amazing things with our technology. And yes, we have to compete for talent with the Apples and Googles and Amazons of the world, but when people start really believing in our mission and the fact that we're enabling utilities to incorporate renewables and ensure clean energy is brought onto the grid and balancing the grid and managing inertia and balancing load demand. And these are things that are changing the way we live. And it's ensuring people that need electric to survive have it. And so it's a calling, we're making a difference in the world. And I think that speaks to people in our industry and hopefully we can attract more as the technology accelerates.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think there's a feeling of accomplishment when working in the power industry. You feel like you're doing something that's important and really making a difference for people's lives and providing service that everybody needs. So it's a great outlook. As we move into this more decentralized realm where, power is being produced everywhere and not always at these giant power stations, and as power demand grows, what do you think the future of stability looks like going forward?
That's a great question. And I think there's multiple aspects to this. One is, just physical infrastructure. We need to build out more transmission lines and transmission equipment on the grid, substations. We need to be building more power generation and adding technology like batteries and electrolyzers to the grid. So there's physical infrastructure investments. There's digital software investment that needs to be added to pull in data from the grid from all these. If utilities are installing field sensors and inverters to manage renewables, all that data is now overwhelming the utilities. They have to capture that data, historize that data, and then turn that data into information that they can act on. And that takes a true ecosystem of and powerful digital systems that utilities need to invest in. And it's a stepwise journey for utilities to go on that journey. And even, 10 or 20 years, they might not they still be at the point where they want to be. So it's a constant aggressive plan that utility need to be on. The third thing I would mention here beyond hardware investment and software digital investment, the third thing is just business model transformation and the regulatory forces that are changing some aspects of the business model. And so utilities need to be flexible. They need to be looking at how to add new services to their customers, how to engage their customers more. Gone are the days where utilities are just sending out a physical paper bill and consumers are writing a check and sending it in. Now utilities need to be offering mobile web applications and portals to show consumers where outages are on the grid and how long the estimated time to restoration is. And with the technology in our systems, you can have really accurate estimated times of restoration. And you can tell the average consumer, when their power will come back on with high levels of confidence. And so the technology and the data sharing and the engagement with consumers that trickles down to customer engagement and data sharing.
The last thing I guess I'd like to talk with you about is I know one of the largest T&D events is coming up, and that's Distributech. That's going to be held March 24th to the 27th in Dallas, Texas. I think you and I are both going to be there, and AspenTech is going to have a big presence. Can you talk a little bit about what the company plans to be showing and highlighting during the event?
We will be highlighting all of our automation solutions for control rooms, whether that's generation management, transmission management, distribution management, DERMS, microgrid management, virtual power plants, or IPPs. One of the things that we really are excited to showcase this year is our new network model management solution. AspenTech announced in November of 2024 that we acquired a company called Open Grid Systems out of Glasgow, Scotland. This company has a really powerful, innovative way to model and manage electrical network data. So if you think about an electric grid, you have like a geographic map almost of your electrical assets. And there's all sorts of data that has a geographic electrical location assigned to it and electrical assets. And so this technology, what we call network model management, which is an emerging digital field in the industry, and is really going to become more and more needed by utilities that have lots of distributed energy resources and renewables on the grid to balance that grid to understand where things are on the grid. This technology will be needed for utilities to manage that network data and feed it not only to real-time operational systems like a generation management or transmission management system, but also to some of the IT side of the house, the engineering and planning systems, customer information models, and so forth. So it's a new software application area that is really going to change the industry. And that's something that we really will be highlighting this year at Distributech.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I hope I can catch a demo and see how it works and learn more about it at the show. Again, for listeners, I've been speaking with Sally Jacquemin. She's the Vice President and General Manager of Power and Utilities at AspenTech. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think you'd like to bring up before we wrap up the podcast?
Aaron, thank you very much for your time. I encourage you and any listeners to stop by and say hello at Distributech in Dallas. We'd love to see you.
Well, thanks again, Sally. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I'll catch up with you when we're at the show.